Well, he's hugely unpopular and he's losing some national polls, and it looks like he's on his way to another presidential victory. Hi, this is Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, for the first time that I've seen, and I'm sure there have been others, but the first time that I have seen, the New York Times did some polling on a state-by-state basis in the so-called swing states or battleground states, places like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, Florida, Michigan. And what they found is that President Trump is actually doing better than anybody might have thought if you were to look at the national polls. And in a poll earlier this summer, or rather some analysis earlier this summer from Nate Cohn at the New York Times, they basically said that even Trump could even lose the so-called national vote by a larger margin this time and still win the presidency. Bill, this is, I think, a fascinating acknowledgement from the left. This is the second time in the week that I have heard somebody on the left, the last time was Brian Williams at NBC News, talking about the fact that we actually hold a popular vote in the United States 50 times. What do you think of the concerns that are being expressed by not only the New York Times pollsters, but Jonathan Chait at New York Magazine, who did an analysis of this and says, hey, Democrats, you better wake up?
Well, if the New York Times is saying Donald Trump is ahead, even marginally in these places, then I think the election's already won, frankly. When you think about the amount of the strength of the headwind that conservatives have to sail into, both in terms of things like polls, media, we all know the number is 90% of the media coverage of Donald Trump is negative, and they would certainly like this to be. Let's put it this way: if he was close, or if there's one Democratic frontrunner who was beating him or even close to him, we'd be hearing that story. But the fact that they're saying, this guy's actually kind of ahead, is an indication to me that this guy's actually kind of ahead.
And he seems to be leading. Basically, they're looking at the leading Democratic contenders, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, and Joe Biden. There was one state, and it escapes me now which one it was, in which Biden was ahead by a couple of points, but within the margin of error. And but in the rest of them, Trump seems to be +2, +3, +4, or more, and over Warren, Sanders, and Biden. And basically, Jonathan Chait's analysis in New York Magazine is saying that the Democrats are making the same mistakes that Republicans have in the past by essentially moving toward the extreme of their party during this primary time and essentially abandoning the center. And according to Chait's analysis, anyway, he felt that the GOP did that in 2018, which was largely responsible for their punishing congressional race losses. Do you think that seems like an accurate analysis?
I do. And I think what bears a special analysis is if Trump is up 2 or 4 over Elizabeth Warren or Joe Biden or whoever the case may be, or Bernie Sanders, we have to remember that that people generally tend to vote. They're more, let's just say that they're more motivated to vote against somebody than for them. That, I think, many pollsters have basically discovered that. So when you run Donald Trump against unknown Democrat, the numbers are going to be much closer than they would be if it was Donald Trump versus somebody by name whose flaws and defects we already know. And
by the same token, if you ask about popularity of the president, you can get that highly negative numbers, but it's not putting him in contrast with anybody else who's actually running.
Correct. So if it was Donald Trump versus the Democratic nominee and Trump is up 2, then if the question was Donald Trump versus Elizabeth Warren, Trump would be up 8 or whatever the number would be. The 3 leading candidates that you mentioned in the Democratic field are just terrible. They're awful candidates, awful. I don't see any one of them having look. You don't want to jinx the game, right? But we have not yet heard full-scale attacks on either Biden, Warren, or Sanders, at least in terms of coordinated GOP attacks. For instance, I don't think it's public knowledge that Bernie Sanders never held a job in his life until he was elected mayor. I don't think it's not public knowledge that Bernie Sanders basically just lived off of women and mooched his way into his 40s or 50s or 60s. That will become public knowledge if Bernie Sanders becomes the nominee. Same is true for Biden. Same is true for Warren. And not only do they have a a lot of past that's been conveniently buried by the press. None of them are terribly appealing as people, and especially so to a Democratic Party that has more and more identified itself as the party of identity politics. You've got three old white men running. I'm sorry, you've got two old white men and a white woman running. And just because they look like three old white men doesn't mean that the people won't treat them this way. When you think about how far left their policies have gone, and when you think about under Barack Obama over 8 years, income increased by maybe $1,600, in Trump under 2-3 years, it was $5,000. That's going to take a lot of charisma to talk working class Americans out of Trump too. And I don't see anybody on that stage, anybody who's got the charisma to do it, and certainly no one who's got a plan that sounds reasonable to the middle of the country that still exists despite what people in Hollywood and New York might think.
So the argument that's typically been made from the Democrats' perspective is that they did so well in 2018 and President Trump has lost whatever mojo he had in 2016. However, another element of this New York Times poll shows that if you take 2016 Trump voters who went Democrat in 2018 in those midterm elections,
yep,
2/3 of them plan to swing back to Trump in 2020.
Well, this is missing the point entirely. 100% missing the point, which makes me exceedingly happy. If Democrats are crowing loud about Trump losing support because the Republicans got waxed in the House in 2018, then they are not only missing the point of what's coming up, they're missing the point of what already happened. And that is simply Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot in 2018. What was on the ballot in 2018 were Republicans who had simply spent their entire time sniping at Donald Trump. Trump wasn't on the ballot. If Trump had been on the ballot in 2018, we would have seen Trump supporters come out to support Trump. But what we saw a lot of Republicans who just spent the last 2-3 years completely demonizing Donald Trump, biting the dust. It's no wonder they lost their support. The guy's a phenomenon. He's an anomaly and he's a phenomenon. He is unique unto himself. I can't think of anyone in history like him that has won. The first person that comes to mind, if I think about candidates, I'd probably feel like William Jennings Bryan or something, somebody who had a tremendous emotional appeal to a certain amount of people. But William Jennings Bryan was defeated 3 times. Trump has an appeal, and his appeal is, I'm not a politician. So if the left is saying, well, the Republican politicians got waxed in 2018, therefore people are leaving Trump, they're in for a rude surprise.
The Jonathan Chait, in his analysis in New York Magazine, said that Democrats are making the mistake of playing to the Twitter audience. And, we just recently did a show here at BillWhittle.com about the fact that the vast majority, some 90% of Twitter posts about national politics are done by a tiny fraction, like 10% of the tweeters. And basically he's saying instead of playing to Mr. and Mrs. America, who are a lot more moderate, Democrats are not only playing to the Twitter audience, but they're kind of implying that if you aren't as progressive as some of these leading Democrat candidates are, then you're behind the times. What do you think of the wisdom of that strategy?
I think it's 100%. The strategy is insane. The analysis is correct. I think actually the defining moment of the 2020 election has already occurred, and it occurred quite a long time ago. I think if I was a political strategist for the GOP, I would say the defining moment of the 2020 campaign was when they asked, how many was it, 11, 13 Democratic candidates who thought that illegal aliens should get free health care, and every single one of them raised their hands. If I was running the GOP campaign for Donald Trump, I'd be sitting on that like I'd be sitting on a golden egg. I just, when you have the entire party go that way, you give reasonable Democrats no place to go. Now, they don't have to go to Trump. I'm sure most Democrats, people who are registered as Democrats, really can't stand Donald Trump. But they don't have to go and vote for Trump. They just have to say there's nothing on this thing that appeals to me and not go. That's what happened in 2018 for Republicans. Republicans looked at the 2018 election, didn't see anything on Trump. So a lot of people who criticized the Republican candidate didn't show up, and those guys got thrown out of office. I think I think that is exactly, precisely correct. And I don't know how they get out of it now, Scott. It seems to me like they've been on the rocks for well over a year, and they keep getting deeper and deeper all the time. I think the key to the 2020 reelection of Donald Trump, if it happens, was the 2018 election of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think that it's not that her attacks against Donald Trump have been so effective. It's that her openly stating the most progressive positions in the Democratic Party, which is pretty far out there, by openly calling for them, AOC has forced Democrats to either agree with them or not, and none of them have had the strength to disagree with them. And so that means everybody on stage is raising their hand when it comes time to virtue signal about free healthcare for illegal aliens. The American people want nothing like that. And if they're not willing to go vote for Trump, some of them certainly will be, but if they're not, they're certainly not going to go out in the kind of numbers that they would go out for the first woman president. And to that, I might just simply add this. This is raw speculation, just completely raw speculation, but it's been making the rounds on the fringes. If Donald Trump were to select Nikki Haley as his vice presidential running mate, I think it might be an enormous win, huge win.
There's an analysis that I've heard elsewhere too, that not just what you say about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is correct, but also for another and kind of counterintuitive reason, because you can really attribute Ocasio-Cortez's victory to somebody who took a different approach, an outsider approach to running for office, and ran against a smug insider who was part of the Washington establishment, and she upset him.
Thank you, Bernie.
Yeah, that's basically it. Seriously.
Yeah. Bernie Sanders, you're right. You're absolutely right. Ocasio-Cortez is plugged into those Bernie Sanders voters, and I see them occasionally on the freeway driving their BMWs that say Bernie on it, and I just stare at them mystified. But put that aside for a second.
All burning clean natural gas, no doubt.
No doubt. And that rich Corinthian leather. But there is a subset of the American voter that is just genuinely envious and bitter about anybody else's wealth, and anybody who comes and plays to this crowd is playing to the Paris mob, as far as I'm concerned. They're playing. I'm not saying that a legitimate appeal to poor Americans can't be made. I'm just saying if your entire campaign is running on those rich people stole money from you working class people, and I'm going to go get it back. If that's what you're doing, then you will get an audience and or a following, I should say. And the following that you get will be exceedingly loud and exceedingly loyal, but it'll be a very thin percentage of what's needed to actually win the presidency. And if it should become Bernie Sanders, which I guess is as likely as anything else in this weird time, then once again, I'm sitting on a golden egg, and that golden egg is, how is it possible that a person who said that we have too many different flavors of deodorant, how is it possible that you own 3 houses, Mr. Sanders? After all your talk about the poor, the homeless, the all of it, Donald Trump could, if he was facing Bernie Sanders, could basically say, look, I'm a billionaire. Bernie Sanders is a millionaire. I've got 7 houses. He's got 3. The difference is I'm proud of making money, and he's lying to you, telling you he doesn't, but he does. He doesn't share it. He wants you to share your money. He's going to keep his. Plus, he'll get a whole bunch more. It's almost like taking a shot at the opening ceremony in the Olympics. Scott, you got a sky full of birds. You just pull the trigger, you're going to hit something. This election, I don't know. It gets let's just say firmer and firmer. I haven't seen any trends that have bothered me, and I've seen many trends that don't.
Previously on this show, I believe I referred to President Trump as the post-policy president. Not that he doesn't have any policies, but that he got elected in spite of any policies that he might have had, not
right.
because of them. One of the things that Jonathan Chait points out in this New York Magazine piece, analyzing the New York Times survey, is that that Democrats seem to be working from the premise that the country at large either agrees with them on everything, or that agreeing with the majority of voters on issues is not necessary to win. The campaign has proceeded in blissful unawareness of the extremely high chance that Trump will win again. Is there anybody at all in the Democratic field that you think has a chance of rising up and understanding that it's not the Betsy Warren having a plan for everything that is going to capture the hearts and minds of people? I don't know, Bill, maybe a Tulsi Gabbard, a Cory Booker, Amy Klobuchar, someone like that who is not as extremely leftist as the rest of the field?
Yes, those people I would say have the better chance, but I think at this point in the cycle that they're so far behind that every one of them is considered a loser. If you were to take all of the, Beto O'Rourke people who want to confiscate AR-15s and all of these people who are out there on the fringe, you're not represented by the three that are basically left now, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Joe Biden.
And of course, we said goodbye to Beto this past week.
Well, if you take all of those people who voted for those fringe candidates and put them together behind one candidate, you might have an actual challenge there. But since they're so divided, you've got your Kamala Harris people who might have an awful lot in common with your Beta people, but it's like no one can agree on anything. They're terribly fractured, and the leading candidates they have are terrible candidates, and they know it. We talked in an episode last week about major Democratic donors saying, "Hey, can we just kind of just chuck these guys and pick another random 10 people out of the audience, see if we can find somebody who could win this thing?" This is
talking about that consolidation of the voter populace among the Democrats. I haven't heard anybody making a big play for the Beto O'Rourke voters.
No, me neither. And by the way, Scott, I think you really put your finger on it. So we'll just use Elizabeth Warren as an example because she's probably the most clear contrast in this regard. When you refer to Donald Trump as a post-policy president, I completely agree, and I think that's an absolutely wonderful thing. What the left is always thinking about politics. It's their religion, it's their hobby, it's their sexual fantasies, it's everything. It's all about politics, and so they assume through mirroring, which everybody does, they assume that among the many things they hate about Donald Trump, it's his policies. And if they could just point out his policies and his hypocrisy or his idiosyncrasies to the American people, they would wake up and suddenly, become liberals. But what they don't understand, and actually seem incapable of understanding, is that Donald Trump was sent to Washington to destroy Washington. That's why he was elected. He was elected to go in there and destroy things, which is why when people say he has no plan, he's blundering from one place to another, he's firing all of these people, Donald Trump supporters just go, okay, sweet. He's certainly beating the partridges out of the bushes, and guys like James Comey and Brennan and so on, and their true colors, and admirals coming out saying, we need to get rid of this president before the election. I think it's the first time in 232 years or something that a flag rank officer was basically calling for some kind of insurrection. What Donald Trump is doing is going in there and smashing things. And he's good at smashing things. And if the Democrats' answer is going to be he's coming to Washington and he's smashing everything, if they think that's going to turn people away from Donald Trump, they got a big 4 years after 2020 to think that over again.
If you haven't had a chance to visit our friends over at the Patriot Post yet,
They're
we
great.
encourage you to do so. We've published a link in the description below. It's America's News Digest, and I think you're really going to enjoy what they're doing over there, as the folks over at the Patriot Post have enjoyed what we're doing here at BillWhittle.com. Most of what we do here at BillWhittle.com is, of course, made possible by the members. If you'd like to find out more about membership, you can go to BillWhittle.com, see most of our videos, but you won't see the members-only content. You won't see the comments, the forums, the blog that's written by members until you become a member. Why don't you give that a try? You can sign up for 1 month for just $9.95, and if you decide you hate it, you will get a cheerful and rapid refund, and I can say that boldly because we almost never get anybody who decides they hate it. So why don't you check that out today at BillWhittle.com. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.